Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Hey, good morning, everybody. Okay, today we will continue with our study of the chapter on mastering the mind. This is chapter 8. And last time I dealt with the 6 recollections, and now we come to page 281. This is the Satipatthana Sutta. We have already.
Yes, we have a. Oh, we have a.
Yeah. Yeah, there are different ways to treat the Satipatthana Sutta. At Bodhi Monastery, when I'm giving lectures on the Majjhima Nikaya, then I treated the Satipatthana Sutta in detail. So that took, I think, about 12 lectures, 12 classes to cover the Satipatthana Sutta. But this book is intended as a kind of general survey of the Buddha's teachings. So I'm not going to do a very detailed treatment or explanation of the Satipatthana Sutta, but give a more general overview of the sutta. An analogy for this that I thought of, it's a little bit like the MapQuest or Google Earth. You can adjust it to different degrees of amplification. So, to give a fully adequate treatment of the Satipatthana Sutta, one has to adjust it to a high degree of amplification, and then go into each section and explain each section in detail. But in this overview or survey of the Buddha's teachings, we pull the amplification back so that we get a broader overview of the sutta. So rather than try to treat it in 12 lectures, 12 classes, perhaps we can do it in 2 classes. Okay, so if we look on page 281, where the sutta begins. Okay, the sutta begins when the Buddha was living in the Kuru country. This is in northern India. It's the area where Delhi is now. Okay, the town of the Kurus named Kamasa Dhamma. Okay, so he begins by addressing the monks. Now he begins with a phrase which has been a little bit subject of controversy. The Pali expression is ekayano muggo. I will write that on the board. Yeah, the Pali expression ekayano muggo. The Chinese translators have mistranslated it, taking it to be ekayana muggo, ekayana muggo, the path of one vehicle. And then they tie that in with the one vehicle theory of the Lotus Sutra, the Bhagavad Jing. But there's a difference between yana and ayana. So breaking down ekayano, it's eka, which means one, and ayano, which means literally going. and then Mago is path. Now there was a tradition of translating this expression coming out of English translators from Sri Lanka or Ceylon, translating this expression, "This, O monks, is the only way," or "This is the sole way," S-O-L-E, or "This is the exclusive way," something in that spirit. And then this becomes the kind of means by which the Theravadan Buddhists then grasp upon Satipatthana and present it as their answer to the Christian evangelicals who say, Jesus is the only way. So they say, the four foundations of mindfulness, that is the only way. But the original expression, ekayana, doesn't mean only. If it was to be only way, it would be ayang bhikkhave ekova, one only Mago, ekova Mago. But ekayano Mago means, the expression ekayana means literally one going. And the commentaries give different explanations of it, some not particularly convincing. Now, the only real hint within the Nikayas themselves as to the meaning of this expression is a sutta called the Greater Discourse on the Lion's Roar. This is the 12th discourse in the Majjhima Nikaya, in which we find the Buddha describing his knowledge, his super knowledge of how a person could be heading for a particular mode of rebirth based on his behavior, his present behavior. And the Buddha says that he gives similes for each of his types of knowledge. And for example, somebody who is heading for a rebirth in the hell realm, he says that just as if there were a burning charcoal pit and a person was walking along a kayano Mago, heading straight for that charcoal pit, then somebody, a man with good sight, seeing him would know this person is walking along such a path that he will fall into that charcoal pit. Okay, so here we have the expression ekayano Mago, describing the path heading towards that charcoal pit. It doesn't mean that is the only path heading to that charcoal pit, but rather it's a path going in one direction towards that charcoal pit. And so from this passage, we can see that the expression ekayano Mago means a path going straight to a particular destination, a path going directly to a particular destination. Or using a modern analogy, it's like a one-way street in a town, a street going only in one direction. You can't turn back, make a U-turn and go in the other direction on that path, on that road. Okay, so now the Buddha is going to be speaking here about a path that goes in one direction. And what is that direction? It is towards the purification of beings, towards the surmounting or overcoming of sorrow and lamentation. Sokha paridevahanam samatikamaya. For the passing away or extinction of pain and dejection. Dukkha domanasana atkangamaya. Okay, so all of these here are describing what you might call experiential aspects of the practice of this one-way path. Then comes, we move now into what I call the supramundane dimension, the world transcending dimension, for the attainment of Nyaya, which means, here it's translated true way. It could also be translated the right method. And the commentary explains that this means for the attainment of the world transcending Noble Eightfold Path. And then we have for the realization of Nibbana, Nibbanasa Sachikiriyaya. And what is that one-way path that's heading towards these goals? I'll use the Pali, Chattaro Satipatthana. It's the 4 Satipatthanas. And this word Satipatthana needs some explanation also. Okay, the word Satipatthana is what we call in Pali grammar, it's a compound, which means it's 2 words joined together. And then the question comes up, what is it a compound of? What are the 2 words being compounded to form this compound? And some of the Pali commentaries give an explanation of Satipatthana as a compound of sati, which means mindfulness, and patthana, which means basis or foundation. And so we then get a very nice sounding combination or expression in English, foundations of mindfulness. So this has become sort of the most popular way of rendering the expression Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And this has become almost standard amongst expositors of the Buddhist sutras. But there's a lot of evidence that this way of interpreting the compound and this way of explaining it is not correct, that it doesn't conform to the original meaning. The evidence that it doesn't conform to the original meaning comes from many suttas which use expressions like satting upatapepa, having set up or having established mindfulness. That is when a monk is beginning to practice meditation, he sits down, he folds his legs, straightens the body, and then satting upatapepa, having established mindfulness, parimukkham satting upatapepa, having set up mindfulness before him, then he starts to practice. Or we have a description of somebody who is engaged in the practice of mindfulness as upatita sati, one who has established mindfulness. And so from these expressions, and there are still more along the same line, we could see that the real derivation of Satipatthana is sati plus upatthana. Upatthana means setting up or establishing. So therefore I translate it now the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And we get further confirmation of this way of interpreting the compound from the way the Sanskrit texts have presented this expression. The texts were translated from various Prakrits into Sanskrit, or what's called the Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, maybe several centuries after the time of the Buddha, 2 or 3 centuries. And the translators into Sanskrit would have had the tradition of explanation on which they based their renderings. And so when they translated this expression into Sanskrit, it comes out as above there, Smrit Upasthana. Smritya or Smriti represents Sati, and then we could see Upasthana shows that they understood it as Upatana, setting up or establishing. So what we have here are not 4 foundations of mindfulness in the sense of 4 objects, but rather 4 ways of setting up or establishing mindfulness. So these 4 ways are distinguished or differentiated with reference to their objects. And so in the end, it might not differ that much from the 4 foundations of mindfulness, but still there is, you could say, a difference in nuance or a difference in emphasis on whether the emphasis is on the objects, which is what is implied by the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or in contrast, the whole process of setting up or establishing mindfulness. And I think taking it as establishing of mindfulness gives a broader meaning, since there we're bringing in not only the object, but the whole, call this constellation or group of factors that is involved in the setting up mindfulness. Okay, so now this is the opening statement by the Buddha about the one-way path and so on, and then concluding this with the 4 satipatthanas, the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And now the Buddha is going to give a filling out of that opening statement, a completion of it, by explaining what are these 4 establishments of mindfulness. Okay, so what are the 4? Here monks among 12 contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having subdued or removed longing and dejection in regard to the world. Similarly, he dwells contemplating feelings and feelings. He dwells contemplating mind in mind. He dwells contemplating phenomena in phenomena, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having subdued longing and dejection in regard to the world. It's quite a lot to explain here. The first thing that might strike you when you look at these formulas is a duplication, what seems to be a redundancy or a duplication. For example, in the first one, he dwells contemplating the body in the body. Sounds like a very strange expression. Let me write this on the whiteboard. What we have to do is get an electronic board. Best yet, one that can read my thoughts. So I just have to think of the expression. Haven't they invented that yet?
The first part, yes.
The what?
The first part, yes. There are...
The electronic ones, where I could be sitting here and...
You could just be writing on your screen. It would be right there.
Really? Then we have to get one.
You actually have the capability of doing that now. You can all do voice recognition to say something and show up. Can't read your mind. Cannot read your mind.
Yeah.
Recognize your voice.
Can we program it so it will know Pali? We could run my Pali course through it, and then it will learn all the Pali grammar and stuff.
You can teach it, yeah.
It's useful to have this written out because we can actually see what the original text says. If we translate it very literally, the first expression, kaye kayanupasi, would be translated with viharati. He dwells as a body contemplator in regard to the body. Then the next one, Vedanasu Vedananupasti Viharati. He dwells as a feeling contemplator in regard to feelings. Chitte Chittanupasti Viharati. He dwells as a mind contemplator in regard to mind. And then the fourth, Dhammesu Dhammanupasti Viharati. He dwells as a Dhamma contemplator in regard to Dhammas, phenomena. Now the commentaries give several explanations of this replication or duplication of expressions. The commentary says, for example, he dwells as a body contemplator in regard to the body. It explains, when one is contemplating the body, one contemplates it only as a body. One doesn't contemplate it as being mine, I, myself. One doesn't contemplate it as being a person, an individual identity. But when one is contemplating the body, one suspends or puts aside, puts in brackets, all interpretations of the body as being mine, I, myself, a person, a being, a man, a woman, and focuses upon the body simply as a body, the body that's experienced as such. Another explanation the commentary gives is that when one is contemplating one object of mindfulness, one doesn't mingle it or mix it with other objects of mindfulness. That is, when one is contemplating the body, then one doesn't contemplate feelings, one doesn't contemplate mind, one doesn't contemplate the mental objects, but one sort of separates each of these four bases or foundations of mindfulness, and one focuses exclusively on that foundation of mindfulness, not bringing in the other foundations, the other objects of mindfulness. And so those are two explanations given in the commentary. It struck me recently, again, I have to label this my personal understanding, not authorized by tradition, that this duplication might simply be a peculiar style of expression in Pali, as might not have any more particular significance. Sometimes one finds in Pali that a verb and an object, a sentence will use a verb which relates to an object, which both suggest the same idea. Both the verb and the object suggest the same idea. For example, in Pali, when we say that one clings to something, for example, one clings to views, they will say one clings to views through a clinging to views. So instead of saying simply one clings to views, one has to say one clings to views through a clinging to views, which to us sounds redundant. But that is just the style of expression in Pali. So it struck me that this might be a case similar to that, where it's just a way of saying, a rather complicated way of saying that one's dwells contemplating the body, one's dwells contemplating the feelings, one's dwells contemplating mind, one's dwells contemplating mental objects. So maybe we don't have to read any special significance into the duplication. I'm not sure about that. Okay, anyway, we begin with specifying what are the objects of this contemplation, and then we have that special, we have the special word anupassi here, which is translated contemplation. Now, the derivation of this is interesting and important. Anupassi comes from the verb pasati, which means to see. And then the prefix anu suggests the idea of repetition. Repetition, and also the idea of consistency or continuity. So when one practices anupassi, when one practices kai anupassi, what we call contemplation of the body, it means repeatedly or continuously seeing the body. We might even translate this observation. One practices the observation of the body, the observation of feelings, the observation of the state of mind, the observation of Dhamma's phenomena. And so this is a close, repeated, consistent, continuous perception of the object. And then what are the factors that are involved in this close observation of the object? These factors are what are being specified in the rest of the sentence. So he dwells contemplating the body and the body, atapi sampajano satima, ardent, clearly comprehending, and mindful. Pineya loke abhijja domanasan, having subdued longing and dejection in regard to the world. Here we have three words, first three words, ardent, clearly comprehending, and mindful, which are pointing to three distinct factors or aspects of this process of contemplation. First, this word ardent, atapi. According to the Abhidhamma, the commentaries, other texts, this implies the presence of energy or effort, making the right effort. Then clearly comprehending, sampajano. This implies the presence of some degree of understanding, knowing clearly, being aware, fully aware. Maybe I'll avoid the use of awareness, which is rather vague, but knowing clearly, knowing precisely what one is doing. And then comes mindful. Mindful is in a way the key word to this whole process of development, which is why it's called the four establishments of mindfulness. And yet when we speak about establishments of mindfulness, we have to take, this is why I prefer establishments to foundations of mindfulness. Because what's being specified is not only the object, but the whole process of setting up mindfulness. And that whole process involves contemplating or observing the object, doing so ardently, that is with energy, with effort, clearly comprehending the object, knowing the object, homing in on the object, and understanding it in the act of observation. And then comes being mindful. Here, the operative word is sati ma, having mindfulness. Okay, the word sati ma means having mindfulness, and so the stem of that word is sati, which in Sanskrit it's smriti. And the word sati originally in Indian languages meant remembrance or memory. It comes from the verb sarati, which means to remember. And so sometimes we find the word sati used in the Pali text in reference to memory of the past. For example, it's said that somebody who has sati remembers what was said and done a long time ago. But the Buddha took this word sati out of everyday usage, the kind of word that he pulled up from its everyday usage, and then he gave it a special meaning within the context of his own teaching. And within the context of his own teaching, sati means remembrance not of the past, but of the present moment. Well, we can say that it means bringing to mind what is occurring in the present moment. So what happens when we remember something? For example, I think of something that I did yesterday. What I do is somehow to pluck out of the storage of my subconscious, I pluck something out and I bring it to mind. I bring it in front, to the forefront of my attention. And so what one is doing in the practice of mindfulness is continually bringing a particular object to the forefront of one's awareness, bringing it to the forefront of one's attention, keeping a particular object continuously in mind, not forgetting that object. And if one from time to time forgets it, then one remembers to bring that object back to the mind, back to the forefront of one's attention. And then one makes the effort to keep it there, to sustain a continuous awareness of the object. Okay, and so the establishment of mindfulness involves the close and continuous observation of the object, and that observation takes place energetically, diligently, as expressed by the word ardent. It is occurring not in a kind of dull stupor, but with a clear comprehension, a clear knowing of the object and of what one is doing. And then what preserves the object in front of one's post of observation, or what ties the object to one's post of observation, what preserves the presence of the object in the forefront of one's attention is mindfulness. Now, the attempt to keep the object present before one's mind In other words, the attempt to remain continuously mindful of the object is subject to strong attacks from different quarters. And the primary enemies, the primary obstructions to the continuity of mindfulness come from two quarters. One is longing, what's called longing. The other is dejection in regard to the world. Here, longing, abhijja, is craving, grasping, desire. And then dejection is, you could say, disappointment, sadness, sorrowful memories, discouragement. Could also include ill will. And so the commentaries say that when the text refers to longing and dejection here, is actually indicating the first two of the five hindrances. Though there's some question about this, we find that longing, abhijja, is often used in the text as a substitute for the first hindrance, kamachanda, sensual desire. We don't find the word dejection, domanassa, used as a substitute for ill will. But that is the way the commentary explains it. And so the commentary says, when these first two of the five hindrances are mentioned, it actually implies that all five hindrances are intended. But even if we don't accept that explanation from the commentary, we could just simply see the text as indicating the two most obstructive enemies of the attempt to maintain mindfulness of the object. The two destructive enemies are craving. One has craving for objects of desire, especially sensual desire. And then one has dejection, feelings of disappointment, sorrow, regrets, involving things that occur in one's worldly life. And so in order to practice mindfulness, to practice this establishment of mindfulness, one has to subdue longing and dejection in regard to the world. It doesn't mean that in order to begin the practice of mindfulness, one has to overcome longing and dejection. But we could say that the practice of developing the foundations of mindfulness is itself the process by which one subdues longing and dejection in regard to the world. Okay, so this formula is repeated in relation to each of the four objects of mindfulness: body, feelings, mind, and dhammas or phenomena. And so we could say that what is meant by a satipatthana, an establishment of mindfulness, is not merely the object itself, but it is this whole process of setting up mindfulness by contemplating the object in itself, not mixing that contemplation with other things, contemplating the object closely and continuously, doing so with energy, with ardently, doing it with a clear comprehension, a clear knowing of the object, being mindful of the object, having that object present before one's awareness. And then in this process of observing the object, one is putting away, removing, subduing craving and dejection arisen from worldly experience. Okay, maybe at this point I will ask whether there's any questions on any of the material that I've covered so far. Yes, Barbara?
You refer to the commentaries. What are the commentaries?
Okay.
I'm asking about the commentaries.
Okay.
You refer to the commentaries.
Yeah, there are old commentaries on each of the Nikayas, which are attributed to an Indian scholar or sage who had come to Sri Lanka and worked in Sri Lanka. His name is Buddhaghosa. Okay. And so for each of the Nikayas has, in fact, each of the parts of the Tripitaka has its commentary. These commentaries, though they are ascribed to Buddhaghosa as the author, actually Buddhaghosa came to Sri Lanka from India because there were earlier commentaries that had been preserved in Sri Lanka, which had probably accumulated over centuries. Probably they go back in their origin maybe to the time of the Buddha, giving simple word explanations. Then as they evolved as they would pass from generation to generation, other practitioners, Dharma masters added to them, sometimes giving more elaborate explanations, bringing in stories, till pretty much they were closed in the 2nd century of the Common Era, and then preserved in Sri Lanka in the old Sinhala language called Hela. And so then Buddhaghosa was sent by the Sangha in India to Sri Lanka in order to translate these commentaries from Hela into Pali. And what he did was not simply to translate them, but since it seems that the old commentaries were quite massive, so he streamlined them, cut them down, and then preserved these rather compact commentaries to each of the Nikayas.
From the practice point of view, I'm a little bit unclear about how, let's say one sits down and the object of one's concentration is the breath, and then you have feelings, and so you shift it to feelings, and then you want to keep it on feelings. But in a sitting, feelings come and go. And then you go back to the breath. So how, from the practice point of view, would one sustain the attention just on the feelings within the feelings when they're moving all the time?
I think maybe this question sort of jumps ahead to the expository sections. So let us just put that question aside, since I want to come into... I want the questions now just to focus upon the introductory passage. Later I'm going to come into the expository section.
I have a question about clear comprehension.
Yeah.
What aspect of the object one needs to know to say that one has clear comprehension?
I don't want to seem elusive or evasive, but also let us suspend that question till we work through the expository sections. Otherwise I might be jumping ahead of myself. I just want to know if there's any questions on what I've covered within this introductory section.
I have a question about the longing and rejection of the word.
Okay.
Just related to being mindful. It has to be mindful of what is to be on the present. And longing seems to me refers to something in the future, and rejection is something in the past. So if one has to be mindful of things, one has to be in the present, not in the future or in the past.
Okay, let us say that being mindful of, again, this might be jumping to the expository section, but I'll deal with it just briefly. Okay, even though the longing could refer to something that takes place in the future, and dejection will refer to something that might have occurred in the past, what one has to do is to subdue or overcome the longing and dejection that have arisen in the present, even though their objects might be future and past, but they occur as present events. And so part of the process of subduing them is bringing the mind to a present object. For example, the breath or some aspect of the body, and then just letting go of the longing and the dejection.
Among these four foundations, is there an order in which we should
Is there one?
be mindful of? An order like you are mindful of the body first and then your feelings.
Oh, is there an order?
Yeah. For the beginners to understand.
Okay. Okay, this is a useful question. The text always presents the four foundations of mindfulness in a particular order, as we find here, going from body to feelings to states of mind, and then dhammas, which are considered to be usually particular mental factors. So I think that they're presented in this order in order to go from what is the coarser or grosser or more evident object to the more subtle objects. This doesn't imply that one necessarily must practice the four foundations of mindfulness in this order. That seems to be, we call this the general process, or the general prescription, is to begin with a coarser object, like the body, and then as one practices with the body, this makes one more sensitive, it makes one's mindfulness sharper, clearer, and then one could focus in on this progressively more subtle objects. So that is the rationale underlying the sequence. But the Buddhist texts recognize a great diversity of personality types, individual types, personality types. And so it's said that if a person, by reason of their temperament, is more inclined to another object, then one can begin with that particular object with which one naturally gravitates. But eventually one should cover all four objects of mindfulness.
Which implies an overlap possible, but on the other hand...
Wait, use the microphone.
That implies an overlap among these four sections. But when you're exploring the sutta, said when body, only body, when mind...
Yeah, that is the way the commentary explains it. There's definitely distinctions between these objects. They're not... We said there's an overlap, but we can't say that they're identical. But what I would say is that when one is observing a particular object, it will make one more sensitive to the other objects. And in regard to mind, as we'll see, I have to say the way the contemplation of mind is presented, in order to understand the particular state of mind, because mind or consciousness itself is something very general. So in order to hone in on a particular state of mind, one has to do it by way of its associated mental factors. But we'll see this later when we come to the contemplation of mind. Okay, I want to move on now. And start with the contemplation of the body. as I mentioned just now in response to that question, it seems that the Buddha has taken the body, kaya, as the first object of mindfulness, because the body is the grossest, the coarsest of the four objects of mindfulness, and therefore it's the easiest to observe, the easiest to focus in on. And within the section of contemplation of the body, we have, according to the traditional way of counting, 14 objects of mindfulness, or 14 distinct contemplations. These 14 are derived, well, first we have the mindfulness of breathing, then the four postures, then clear comprehension, then we have the unattractive nature of the body, then we have the analysis of the body into the four elements, and then we have what are called the 9 charnel ground contemplations, 9 cemetery contemplations. But it seems to me, again this is my personal opinion, that the distinction of the charnel ground contemplations into 9 different exercises is a little bit artificial. And that we could really group them all together into one category. And in this way we would get a simpler presentation of 6 types of contemplation of the body, or 6 domains of contemplation relating to the body. Now, in the Pali version of the Satipatthana Sutta, we begin with mindfulness of breathing, anapanasati. But there are versions of this Satipatthana Sutta which have come down in the Chinese Tripitaka, translated from other early Buddhist schools. And in at least 2 of those versions, the contemplation of the body begins not with mindfulness of breathing, but with the 4 postures, observation of the 4 postures. Then it moves to the clear comprehension of the activities. And then, in the 3rd place, we have mindfulness of breathing. And it seems to me, and some others have also contended this, that this seems to be a more reasonable way of presenting the contemplation of the body, in that one is beginning with something coarser, with one's activities in day-to-day life, and then moving from there to a more subtle practice, which is a practice that takes place in the sitting posture, that is the mindfulness of breathing. And so, in the process of developing mindfulness, one would be mindful when walking, sitting, when walking, standing, sitting and lying down. Then one applies clear comprehension when involved in one's day-to-day activities. And then after one has developed mindfulness and clear comprehension to some extent in these grosser activities, then one is considered ready to sit down and begin a meditation practice which develops a more intensified mindfulness through attention to a single, simple object. But it could be the case that the compilers of the Pali Suttas moved mindfulness of breathing to the first position for a particular reason. And this could give some justification for taking mindfulness of breathing first. And this would be the reason, the way I would understand it. One begins with mindfulness of breathing Because in order to apply mindfulness effectively in everyday life, one needs to have some experience of what it means to be mindful. And if one says simply, be mindful when walking, be mindful when standing, be mindful when sitting down, apply clear comprehension when walking forward and coming back, when bending and stretching, and so on. A young practitioner, a new practitioner, doesn't really have a clear idea of what is expected of him. But when one starts to practice with mindfulness of breathing, then one begins to understand what does it mean to be mindful, to keep an object steadily in the forefront of attention. What does it mean to know an object close up and consistently in order to be able to practice clear comprehension in everyday life? And so, for example, in a monastic situation, we have a young newly ordained monk, and so the basis for the monastic life is the practice of meditation. And so he'll be taught initially a basic meditation practice, mindfulness of breathing. And then this will be the practice that he undertakes in the hours that are reserved for meditation. And then through this practice of mindfulness of breathing, then he is becoming acquainted with the meaning of mindfulness, the experience of mindfulness, what we can call the experiential taste of mindfulness. And then also he'll be challenged to develop this clear comprehension, to know an object, even if it's a very simple object like the breath. And so through this practice of mindfulness of breathing, he will be developing mindfulness and clear knowing. And then when he emerges from meditation and then has to move about, going here and there, he'll be able to extend or continue that observation that's involved in developing mindfulness, that self-observation, keeping one's bodily actions, one's states of mind, keeping them under observation. And so in that way, he will be able to practice more effectively mindfulness and clear comprehension with regard to the four postures and with regard to the activities of everyday life. Okay, so this deals with this order or sequence of the initial meditation objects. Okay, then it seems to me, again, this is my personal opinion, that here mindfulness of breathing is being used as the foundation meditation object in order to develop this quality of mindfulness and clear comprehension with which one can then proceed further into the other exercises included in mindfulness of the body or contemplation of the body. So one uses the mindfulness of breathing as a basic meditation object. And then for those, now mindfulness of breathing can be extended all the ways through all four foundations of mindfulness. And by itself, it forms a self-sufficient vehicle for going all the ways to the highest enlightenment, to what's called Vijja Vimutti, full knowledge and liberation. But within the framework of this Satipatthana Sutta, this very broad, comprehensive approach to the development of mindfulness, it seems that one uses the mindfulness of breathing to develop the qualities of mindfulness and clear comprehension. And then when those qualities are brought up and developed to some extent, then one can move into the other exercises, the examination of the body in order to dissect it into its constituent parts. That's the exercise 4, the unattractive nature of the body. And then one can move the mindfulness further into the dissection or analysis of the body into its constituent elements, the 4 material elements. And then one moves further into the 9 cemetery meditations in order to get a clear idea or a clear experiential perception of the impermanence of the body, its eventual decay, disintegration and decay. Now, all of this is taking place, is the way I see it, enfolded within this envelope of mindfulness of breathing, which is the basic exercise. Okay, and so here we can go directly into the section of mindfulness of breathing. Now, in the full the full Anapanasati Sutta, that's the discourse on mindfulness of breathing, and in a section of the Samyutta Nikaya on mindfulness of breathing, the Buddha explains Satipatthana in terms of 16 steps or 16 aspects. And those 16 aspects are divided into 4 groups. Of the 16, 4 steps are included within each of the 4 groups. And those 4 groups correspond to the 4 establishments of mindfulness, the 4 fourfold setting up of mindfulness. And so the practice of mindfulness of breathing extends over all 4 foundations of mindfulness, all 4 satipatthanas. And we will come to this later when we come to the Anapanasati Sutta, which I've included here. I've included here the section on mindfulness of breathing. But in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha presents under mindfulness of breathing includes only the 4 exercises, the first 4 exercises from the mindfulness of breathing sutta, from the Anapanasati Sutta. Okay, so now we begin here in paragraph 4, page 282. How does a monk dwell contemplating the body and the body? And now he's going to explain this first with regard to mindfulness of breathing. So here a monk gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut. He's mentioned the ideal places for developing mindfulness of breathing. He sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, having straightened out the body, and having established mindfulness in front of him. Parimukkang sating upatapetva. There we get that expression as having established, which is also the same word that goes into satipatthana, sati upatthana, the establishment of mindfulness. Okay, then sattva asasati, sattva sasati. Just mindful, he breathes in, mindful, he breathes out. Okay, and this one sentence keys us to the entire practice of mindfulness of breathing. And we get here, interestingly, it's sattva. Yeah, this word sattva, it's an abridgment of satto eva. This little particle va or eva here is extremely important because it underscores the fact that the essence of the practice is having this mindfulness always present, continuously present, as one is breathing in and as one is breathing out. And so I say the essence of the whole practice of mindfulness of breathing is compressed into this one sentence: being simply mindful while breathing in, being simply mindful while breathing out, or being ever mindful, continuously mindful while breathing in, continuously mindful while breathing out. And so the whole practice of mindfulness of breathing unfolds from that exercise, that intention of constantly and continuously being mindful of the breath as one breathes in and as one breathes out. And then the important question comes up: when one breathes in and out, where is one's mindfulness to be established? Where is it to be directed? And here there's a very significant difference between the explanation of mindfulness of breathing given within the Pali or Theravada tradition and the explanation given within texts of the Northern tradition, stemming from the Abhidharma Kosha. According to texts like the Abhidharma Kosha, which have been the basis for the practice of mindfulness of breathing in Chinese Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, when one breathes in, one follows the breath from the place where it originates, the nostrils, or the tip of the nose, then through the nostrils, then down into the lungs, or even down to the belly. And then one follows the out-breath from the place where it originates, the belly or the lungs, out through the nostrils, then out through the tip of the nose. And so one is following the breath in its movement through the body. The way I see it, and also, the way some of the other Theravadan teachers see it, if one is following the breath in its movement through the body, it will be very difficult to develop jhana on the basis of the breathing, to develop the mental fixation or the absorption, because one is following the breath in different places. The teachers in the Pali tradition, going back to a work called Patisambhita Magga, say that when observing the breath, the focal point should always be the area at the nostrils, around the nostrils, or the upper lip, where one can experience the sensation of the breath, the feeling of the breath as it comes in and out. And to illustrate the way the attention should be focused at that one point, well, first they compare the mindfulness there to a guard who is guarding the door of a building. And when the guard is at the entrance to the building, the guard will be aware any people come in. He opens the door and so they come in. Any people come out of the building, he's aware of the people going out of the building. But the guard, if he's doing his duty properly, when somebody comes in, he doesn't follow that person into the building, onto the elevator, up to the third, fourth floor. And when somebody is going out, he doesn't follow them into their taxi and drive away with them. But the guard just remains at the door, checking people as they come out, checking people as they come in, when they come out, maybe hailing a taxi for them, but letting the people coming in and going out go about their own business without following them. And so, analogously, the mindfulness is the guard at the entrance to the breathing passages. That is, it's set up, the mindfulness is set up at the nostrils, around the nostrils, just beneath the nostrils, on the upper lip, wherever one experiences the breath coming in and going out. Again, this is compared to a man who is sawing a block of wood, a log. He has the saw in his hand. There's the block of wood laid out, maybe on the table in front of him. And he takes the saw and he saws back and forth. But where is his attention fixed as he's sawing the block of wood? The attention is fixed on that point where the teeth of the saw strike against the wood and cut through the wood. He doesn't follow the saw as it moves away from him. He doesn't follow the teeth of the saw as they move closer to him. But in order to be able to cut the block of wood effectively, he just keeps his attention on that one area where the teeth of the saw are cutting through the block of wood. And so one keeps the attention focused on this area at the nostrils, around the nostrils, just below the nostrils. And one lets the in-breath come in, one lets the out-breath go out, but one doesn't follow the in-breath into the body and through the body, and one doesn't follow the out-breath out into the atmosphere, but the attention is always fixed on that particular place where one can experience the impact of the breath. In the old language, this is called the nimitta. Not in the sense of the later language, nimitta, as the radiant ball of light, but simply it is the object where one experiences the in and out breath. In the older Pali language, the nimitta means simply the object of attention, the object of awareness. It doesn't yet have that special meaning of that visualized light, point of light or ball of light, but it's simply the place of attention, the place of awareness. And so for Anapanasati, according to the teachers of the southern tradition, the place, the nimitta or place of awareness, place of attention, is this area around the nostrils. And it is there that one observes the breath as it comes in, as it goes out. And so now, from that introductory point, then we come to 4 ways of observing the breath that are mentioned. These are the 4 that constitute the first of the first 4 of the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing in the Anapanasati Sutta. Okay, when one breathes in long, then one understands or one knows, I breathe in long. That is the first. When breathing in, actually the first is when breathing in long, one understands I breathe in long. And when breathing out long, one understands I breathe out long. And now we have here an important word that's translated, one understands. It's pajanati. this word bhajanati, this verb bhajanati, is the basis for the noun panya, or Sanskrit prajna, which is usually translated wisdom. But at this point in the practice of mindfulness of breathing, there is no wisdom in the sense of a higher knowledge, a deeper understanding. But this is simply being aware of the breath, knowing when breathing in long that the breath is long, knowing when breathing out long that the out breath is long. And so it seems to me that here the verb bhajanati is more closely connected with the word sampajana, which is what we translate clear comprehension. So this is the element of clear comprehension involved in mindfulness of breathing. That is, when breathing in long, knowing, understanding, comprehending that the breath is long. When breathing out long, comprehending, understanding that the breath is long. And so sometimes the question comes up, in being aware of the breath, what is the relationship of mindfulness and clear comprehension? The way I would understand it, and again this is my personal opinion, I haven't seen this discussed in the texts themselves. So the way I would understand it, mindfulness is that particular mental factor that keeps the object, in this case the breath, continuously present before the mind. Mindfulness is remembering to be aware of the object. We could say mindfulness is retaining the object in mind, not letting the object slip away. And if the object slips away, then bringing the object back to the mind. That is the function of mindfulness. Okay, so mindfulness is what keeps the object present to the mind. That is, keeping the in-breath and out-breath present to the mind. Then the function of clear comprehension is to know first, when breathing in, that one is breathing in. When breathing out, to know that one is breathing out. And then making that attention more refined. When breathing in long, knowing that the breath is long. When breathing out long, knowing that the out-breath is long. So that is the job, the task, the function of clear comprehension. Okay, then the same thing is repeated with regard to the short breath. When breathing in short, one understands I breathe in short. When breathing out short, he understands I breathe out short. It strikes me a little bit puzzling that the long breath is presented before the short breath, since it seems to me, not only to me, but everybody has this experience, that when one sits down to begin the exercise of being mindful of the breath, initially the breath is longer because it's coarser, and then when one starts to breathe, I lost my mindfulness. When one starts to be aware of breathing in and out, initially the breath is shorter or quicker because the mind is still excited or agitated. But as the mind settles down and one becomes more aware of the breath, then the breath becomes subtler and quieter, and then the breath becomes longer. So this is a little bit puzzling. The way I would interpret this now, the long breath should be understood to be the coarser breath, and then the short breath should be understood to be the subtle breath. So in breathing in long, one is aware of breathing in long. That means when taking a coarse breath, one is aware that one is taking a coarse breath. When the breath becomes quieter and subtler, then one is aware that one is taking in, breathing out with a subtler, quieter breath. Okay, so these two are the first two stages of steps in mindfulness of breathing. And sometimes they could alternate. Sometimes one can be breathing have a very quiet, very subtle breath. Then suddenly maybe some disturbance comes into the mind, and then the breath will become longer or coarser again. So whatever the breath is, long or short, coarse or subtle, one understands the breath as it is. And then as one is knowing the breath, following the breath, gradually over time the breath becomes subtler and subtler, quieter and quieter, moving in a direction towards the complete stopping of the in and out breath, which takes place in the fourth jhana. Okay, now we come to the third step in the mindfulness of breathing. And notice there's a change in the verb here. He trains thus, I will breathe in, experiencing the whole body. He trains thus, I will breathe out, experiencing the whole body. Here we have the change in verb from simply knowing to sikati, evam sikati. He trains thus, which means that when one reaches this third step, one is now making a more deliberate effort. And this more deliberate effort is expressed as experiencing the whole body when breathing in, when breathing out. Sabakaya pati samvedi asasati. Sabakaya pati samvedi pasasi samiti sikati. Okay, what is meant here by experiencing the whole body? First, I will give the traditional commentarial explanation. This is the standard Theravada explanation. It is said that the breath itself is to be considered a body. We call this the whole body of breath. And so to experience the whole body means to be aware of the entire cycle of in and out breathing. And so the cycle of in and out breathing is divided into the two primary stages of in-breath and out-breath. And then each of these two stages has three phases. The in-breath has the beginning, then it has the middle, and it has the end. Then the out-breath has its beginning, its middle, its end. And so, when one undertakes this training, I will breathe in experiencing the whole body. What one does is make the determination to be aware of the entire in-breath from its very beginning all the way through its entire duration, not letting the mind stray or wander or lose track, not letting the mind lose track of the in-breath. till one comes to the very end of the in-breath. Then the breathing turns around with the beginning of the out-breath, and again one has to make the determination to be fully aware of this out-breath from the moment of its beginning all the way through its duration till its very end. Then when one reaches the end of the out-breath, again one establishes the mindfulness on the in-breath from its beginning through its middle to its end. Then again with the out-breath, beginning, middle, and end. And this act of determination establishes the continuity of mindfulness so that the mindfulness doesn't wander away from the object. And now one is able to observe the in-breath, out-breath, always with the attention the same place, around the nostrils, in the nostrils, around the nostrils, wherever one experiences the breath most distinctly. But now one is following the whole course of the breath without losing track of it, without the mind wandering. Okay, that is the standard traditional interpretation. It seems to me, this is my heretical opinion, or my variant opinion, I just find it difficult to understand this expression, whole body, in terms of that explanation. It seems to me that whole body has to be taken as literally true. And also the word patisamvedi, which in Pali, it conveys the flavor of experiencing, not being aware or being attentive to, but experiencing. So my understanding here is that as one is being mindful of the breath, one is keeping the attention at the nostrils, not following it in other places. But as the awareness of the breath increases, becomes more focused, more subtle, more sensitive, then one is able to experience the whole body. And so one is experiencing the whole body, one has a kind of, I'll call this a background awareness of the whole body, while the focus of the attention remains at the nostrils. And it seems to me, again this is interpretation, that this stage of experiencing the whole body while breathing in and out is referring to the process building up to the attainment of jhana, based, the meditative absorption, based on in and out breathing. Because it's said that when one attains the jhana, in the formula for the jhanas which we had earlier, this is actually in the passage with the similes, page 251. We have, he enters and dwells, paragraph 15 on page 251. He enters and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought and examination, with rapture and happiness born of seclusion. He makes the rapture and happiness born of seclusion drench, steep, fill, and pervade this body, so that there is no part of his whole body that is not pervaded by the rapture and happiness born of seclusion. Okay, then we have this reference to this experience of the whole body in relation to each of the other jhanas. In paragraph 16, paragraph 17, paragraph 18. So, as one enters the jhana, then whatever factors are present, rapture and happiness and so on, are felt as pervading the whole body. So we can see that experiencing the whole body while breathing in and out to be referring to the experience of the body within the jhana. And now as one passes through the stages of jhana, then the breathing becomes subtler and subtler. The breathing is what is referred to here as kaya sankhara, the bodily formation. And so as one is being continuously mindful of the breath while breathing in and out, the breathing itself is becoming quieter and quieter, subtler and subtler. And so that is what is being indicated by this phrase, I will breathe in, tranquilizing the bodily formation. I will breathe out, tranquilizing the bodily formation. Actually, again, this is the way I understand it, one doesn't make a deliberate, intentional effort to tranquilize the breath. One simply makes the effort, the intention to be aware of the breath. But as the awareness of the breath becomes more continuous, becomes better sustained, the breathing naturally settles down and becomes more subtle, more tranquil. And then that is what is being indicated by the tranquilizing of the bodily formation. Okay, then to indicate how the breath is to be observed, the Buddha uses a simile. This is like a lathe worker who is molding an object on a lathe. When he's making a long turn with the object, then he's aware, he understands, I'm making a long turn. When he's making a short turn with his object, he's aware, I'm making a short turn. And so it's in the same way when one is breathing in long, one knows I breathe in long. When breathing out long, one knows I breathe out long. All the way through, the whole passage is repeated. Okay, maybe I'll ask at this point whether there's any questions on the mindfulness of breathing. Yes, please. You can use the microphone.
Yes, I got confused about through the whole body.
Yeah.
You breathe in, you experience the whole body, experiencing the breath from the nose always go through the whole body, or the air goes through the whole body?
No, yeah.
What you are experiencing?
The way I would understand it, also the way the teachers within the Theravada tradition explained it, one doesn't follow the breath in through the body, from the nostrils to the lungs, or some say to the diaphragm, and one doesn't follow the breath out from the diaphragm to the end of the nostrils. The attention always remains at the nostrils, or around the nostrils, wherever one feels the breath coming in and out. But as the mindfulness of the breath becomes subtler and more, becomes subtler, more continuous, more sustained, better sustained, then one can experience the whole body. I call this a background experience of the whole body. So that in the forefront of the attention is this nimitta, the object, which is the impact of the breath around the nostrils. And so one always keeps the attention on that forefront object, the impact of the breath coming in and out. But it's just a natural part of the expansion of the awareness that one will be experiencing the whole body as one is breathing in and out. But one should not follow the breath in through the body or follow it out from the inside of the body, out through the nostrils. But always the attention is simply kept around the nostrils, wherever one feels the breath most distinctly coming in and going out. Flip a coin between you. Okay, we'll start with...
My interpretation of the whole body experience of the breathing in and breathing out, and maybe it's just my experience, is that even with the starting, always being aware that it was coming in through my nostrils and going through the 3 parts in and the 3 parts out.
Yeah.
The awareness expands to the fulfillment of the oxygen in my body, the fulfillment of the whole experience of the breathing into my body and out of my body. And to me, that's the whole body experience, and that's just my interpretation.
Okay, yeah, okay. What I say is that as one is aware of the in-breath, out-breath, with the observation at the post of awareness, one experiences the body, what I call, more panoramically, let's say. So when one says that one experiences the oxygen coming in and out, we have to remember that this is a scientific fact, but it's an interpretation, since one doesn't actually, well, the body doesn't actually know that this is oxygen, though one can experience, well, one does experience a kind of uplifting of the body, which is the result of the oxygen going through. But if one starts putting explanations on it, this is the oxygen coming through, then one is departing from the pure awareness of the breath.
I guess to kind of expand on that, from my experience, I've always found it helpful to start out with the whole process of, and that helps me to just kind of settle the mind, and then I would normally focus on one point, the nimitta. But my real question is nimitta just in relation to the nostrils, or is that just anything that's a focus of concentration?
Okay, let me just take the first 2 points in order. Because the first point that you brought up is actually a good point. And when I explain mindfulness of breathing, especially to beginners, what I say is, first, I don't even mention the breath first, but I say, first be aware as you're sitting there after telling them how to take the posture. First be aware of the whole body. Just get a sense, a kind of tactile sense, of the body as an entity sitting in a particular posture, occupying space. Because normally we just conceptualize our bodies, but we don't have what I call this tactile sense of the concrete reality of the body. And so even for a few minutes, just sit there being aware of the body as an material entity. Even material is interpretation. Just get this tactile sense of the concrete reality of the body. Then for a few minutes sit there like that. Then I say, now be aware that the body is breathing in and out. You just get a tactile sense of the whole breath as you're breathing in and out. Expansion of the lungs, contraction of the lungs, swelling out of the belly, falling of the belly. Then after the person is doing that for a few minutes, then I say, now bring your attention to the area of the nostrils. So this is a good way to go about it, because if one just tells a person, or we just try to go immediately to the nostrils, it's a very subtle object, easy for the mind to slip away. But one sort of hones in from what is evident, grosser, the sense of the whole body, then moving into what's subtler, the tactile, the sensation of the breath coming in and going out. Okay, that was the first point that you mentioned. Then the second point
was nimitta.
The meaning of the word nimitta. The way the word is used in the oldest texts, the suttas themselves, it seems to mean simply the object of concentration. It doesn't necessarily mean the object of mindfulness of breathing. But just in regard to mindfulness of breathing, the proper nimitta is that area around the nostrils where one is experiencing the in and out breath.
And when lying down, the navel? Is that correct? That's what I've heard.
When lying down?
Yes, when lying down in concentration, to focus on the navel, rising and falling.
This I haven't heard connected with lying down, but there is instructions for a method of practice. This is the practice which was taught by the great Burmese meditation master Mahasi Sayadaw, and it's often used by teachers in the Burmese lineage, which is the initial object of mindfulness is the rising and falling of the abdomen. And so when the abdomen is, as you breathe in and out, the abdomen rises and falls. And so the teachers say, when the abdomen rises, simply be aware of rising, making a mental note. When the abdomen is falling, be aware of it and make the mental note falling and falling. Now, strictly speaking, that is not the mindfulness of breathing object, but that is said to be, it's a method of practice which is connected with insight meditation, dry insight meditation, which is different from mindfulness of breathing. So the in and out movement of the abdomen, you could say it's rooted in the breath. It's caused by the breathing. But when one is attending to the rising and falling of the abdomen, it's not attending to the in and out breath, but it's attending to a bodily process which is conditioned by or caused by the breathing. And so the attention to the rise and fall movement of the abdomen moves in a different direction from the straight mindfulness of breathing. It's not moving towards increased concentration, but it's moving towards the direct development of insight. Okay, maybe I'll take one more question and then we have to pause for lunch.
I thought nimitta could be explained as a result or outcome of meditation, as in some textbooks.
This is the meaning of nimitta, which appears over time in later texts like the commentaries. This is the nimitta as a bright light which will appear, say, as one is attending to the breath, as the mind becomes very quiet, then a point of light, sometimes a ball of light will appear. And then this becomes known as the nimitta, or more specifically the patibhaga nimitta, the counterpart sign. But I'm referring to the way the word nimitta is used in the earlier text, where it's simply the object that one attends to as the basis for concentration. Okay, we'll have to stop now and I will go for lunch, then I will come back. And also if you want, you can go to the cafeteria for the lunch, or you can just stay if you don't want to take lunch now. But I'll come back as early as possible, but we'll start the discussion at 12 o'clock and continue for about a half an hour. Okay, so now we'll end with the sharing of the merits. And it seems my self-assigned goal of explaining the Satipatthana Sutta in 2 sessions has been shattered. We'll aim for 3, so it might go to 4. Okay, so we end with the sharing of the merits, with the devas, the deities, the naga spirits, the fierce spirit, guardian spirits, asking them to rejoice in these merits and protect the Dhamma, to protect the world, to protect ourselves and others. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahitika punyantang anumodipa chirang rakantu sasana. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahitika punyantang anumodipa chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva nagamahitika punyantang anumodipa chirang rakantu mang parang. Eta vatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu. I shorten it. Sabbe bhutanumodantu. Sabbe sabdanumodantu. Sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagupadaya avici hetato. Etantare satakayupapanna. Rupi arupicha asanya sanino. Dukha pavuchantu pusantu nibutin.